If you teach at the university level as a professor or an instructor, or if you're a teacher at the K-12 level, my hope is that by the end of this webinar, you will have something practical that you can use as you design the systems and structures in your classroom. And I want to point out that teaching is full of systems. You have rules and procedures, you have ways of doing things, you have physical classroom space, but you also have this design that goes on in terms of how you structure your assignments and those types of systems. And the bottom line is that although we often think about teaching as an art or as a craft or as a science, you're also an architect and you're always designing the systems for your students that they interact with on a regular basis. We talk about having a classroom climate and a classroom community. Well, communities are connected through relationships, but they're also connected through systems. You need a space and a place to inhabit, and those things have rules and norms and mores and all kinds of things like that. So I want to be thinking about, what does it mean to be this architect designing the systems in your classroom? So how do we design our systems? We're going to be getting into this idea of UX design, but before we launch into that, I just want to address this thing of what is UX design. So UX design is short for user experience design. And the big thing to understand about UX design is that the focus is on the user. It begins with the idea that you should design things that people can intuitively use, that you design your products for the users and around their needs and interests and ideas and experiences, and that you are constantly asking, what is it like for this person to experience this product? And again, you hear about UX design theory in product design, whether it's digital products, websites and apps and things like that, or physical products. There's UX design that goes into your couch and your table and your countertops, right? But the goal should always be that there is a focus on the user. Now, I want to point out that this is not the same thing as instructional design. I'm actually not going to get into learning theory. I'm not going to get into pedagogy. I'm not going to get into best practices in education. I'm going to assume that you already know those things. This is about designing the systems that facilitate the pedagogy. This is not the same thing as LX design. There's a great emerging field of LX design that sort of incorporates ideas from both instructional design and UX design. But I'm today really just going to focus on UX design and how we can use elements from UX design to change the way that we create our courses and our classrooms and our structures. So I want to tell you my story about my big epic fail. This was my first online class that I had taught that was fully online, and I assumed that I knew how to teach online. I knew a lot about technology. I had used a lot of technology in the classroom, and so I put together a course, and about halfway through it, students were emailing me with concerns. They didn't know how to navigate things. They were confused about terms I'd used. They didn't know what one assignment was versus another. And I had tried to do this well, but the reality is I wasn't communicating well to my students. And initially I thought, I need to figure out how to communicate in an online structure in a better way. But what I found is it wasn't a communication issue, it was a design issue. See, I had created these unintentional barriers that prevented my students from seamlessly working on the classwork. For example, I used two different terms, discussion and forum, interchangeably, and they didn't know which one we were doing. I created hyper detailed instructions to try to answer every single question they would have, and I overwhelmed them. And so at the end of the semester, I looked at the student surveys I had created, and I actually looked at my course evaluations, and I said, something needs to change. I need to improve the way things are done. And that was when I got into this idea of UX design theory. And UX design theory is really an empathy-driven approach. And the focus I began to ask was, how will my students experience my course? So I began to implement these changes from UX design theory. And this is what happened. I went from a 2.7 in course organization to a 4.9. Now, in general, I still am scoring somewhere between a 4.7 and a 5.0 in course organization for all of my courses right now. And then from clarity of student responsibilities, it went from a 2.4 up to a 4.9. There's a lot of research behind this. Anderson and Garrison's research suggests that success in an online course is dependent on 3 factors. The student's relationship with their classmates, sort of the community that you develop, right? Also, the students and how they interact with the content. So is the content clear? Is it relevant? Is it meaningful? And then also the students and how they interact with the professor. So what is that like? So before we get into the nuts and bolts of what UX design theory looks like in practice, I want to share a sketch video I did about why we would want to use UX design theory for improving our course design. If you're a teacher, you're also a designer. You're the architect designing the physical space and creating the systems for your classroom community. And you're the artist designing the units and projects and materials for your students. And great design is like a ninja. It might seem invisible, but it's also powerful, which is why I love the idea of user experience design theory, or UX design theory. With UX design, you adjust the systems to the user while also guiding them toward an ideal outcome. And this can be helpful as you design courses, lessons, and materials for your students. So here are 7 strategies we can learn from UX design. Number 1, begin with the student in mind. Walk in their shoes. What will students think and feel as they navigate your course? Number 2, create an onboarding experience. If you teach online, you might create an unboxing video showing students how to navigate your course. And if you teach in person, you might create an activity that helps them explore how your class works. Number 3, be simple. Whether you're creating materials or designing systems, think of ways to simplify the process so students can figure out things intuitively. Break things up into lists and use visual cues to guide them. Number 4, be intentional with copy text. Focus on clarity when you write directions. Number 5, be both linear and connective. When creating online courses, for example, make it flow logically, but use links that allow students to make connections between ideas and resources. Number 6, solicit frequent feedback. At the beginning of the year, have students annotate the course documents. Later, conduct periodic student surveys to help you figure out what's working and what's not working, so you can iterate and improve your classroom structures. Number 7, be consistent. Use consistent formatting for your lesson plans and materials and project papers. And be sure to use the consistent assignment titles on the board and in the syllabus and when you reference it in person. Ultimately, UX design can help us create classrooms that are easier to navigate and more student-friendly. So again, great design should feel invisible, and we're going to take a dive into what it actually looks like. Number 1, begin with the users in mind. And the idea here is to fit the system to the students rather than the students to the system. And it helps to ask this question, how will students navigate this course? And I think it works really well to imagine that you are a new student and just ask the questions, what do I know? What do I not know? What do I need to figure out? What do I feel as I am beginning this course? And how can I alleviate those fears? The goal is to keep it intuitive and really to focus on the idea of show rather than tell. I love this example from restaurants. If you go to a restaurant and you look at the table, there are certain things that are in the cues that they have shown you, these visual cues, so they don't have to tell you to do anything. For example, you see this right here. There's a menu. There's 4 menus at the table. The menus tell you exactly what the food cost and what the food is, and it's organized in a way that is intuitive but also logical. And when you sit down at the restaurant, you know exactly how many seats there are. You know where you're supposed to sit. And often when you first show up to a restaurant, you'll see a sign that says something to the extent of, please seat yourself, or a sign that says, please wait to be seated. And either way, that visual cue answers your question before anyone has to tell you anything. You have, in a matter of 1 to 2 minutes, figured out generally how the restaurant works. The same thing happens in airports. Airports are really confusing, right? You've got restaurants, you've got restrooms, you've got flights going at different times. You need to figure out where your flight is, where the rental car thing is, where the baggage claim is. You get the idea. It is overwhelming. And there's lots and lots of people. But in general, people know where to go in an airport because there's these signs, and they often have visual cues that are available for you at any moment that tell you exactly where to go. And you'll find that even when you fly internationally, there are times where it's so intuitive that you just know how to navigate an airport. I was in the Netherlands, and I was flying out of Amsterdam, and the airport was incredibly logical and intuitive, and just I knew where to go. I love asking this question, what can students discover on their own? And then designing things in the classroom so that they can figure it out on their own. So what does this look like in a physical classroom? In a physical classroom, it means that students generally should know where the objectives are, where the warm-up is, where the turn-in spot is for their work, and that those things should be labeled visually, that there should be visual cues, that it should be easy the moment they walk into class to know what to do. Having instructions that are clear and concise on something like signing out to use the restroom. That's an example in a physical classroom. In an online classroom, it involves, again, having those visual cues, having the systems in place, and allowing students to just step into the course and know exactly what to do. One of the best ways to do this leads to point number 2, which is to have an onboarding experience. This is the idea. Onboarding is used in UX design if you think about the apps that you use or the programs you use, the websites you visit, they'll often have an onboarding experience where they walk you through how their systems work. If you think about the first time you used, say, Google Docs, there were these little pop-ups that you saw all over the place that told you, what to do, where to go, how things work. And those little pop-ups are all part of the onboarding experience. They allow you to figure out real quickly how to navigate that particular program, which is Google Docs or Google Drive, I should say. The same thing happens in video games. If you play video games, you'll be able to generally figure out within a couple minutes how the game works. And even in a pretty complex game, those onboarding cues really help you figure it out. So if you're teaching in a physical course, you might do something like a scavenger hunt. One creative way that we've done this is I worked with this teacher, Bonnie, and we created this scavenger hunt. But instead of a traditional scavenger hunt around the class, it was done in sort of an escape room style, and it was this zombie escape room, and it was highly engaging. But the whole goal was that by the end of this activity, this little 20-minute activity, students generally knew where to go in a classroom for everything, where the trash was, where the assignments get turned in, where to find things, how the class works, how the syllabus works, and so on and so forth. If you're teaching online, it helps to have a start here area on your courses. I always begin at the very top by having this start here aspect, and then to do something where you unbox the course. One of the things I found to be really helpful is an unboxing video. Now it's interesting, I did 2 different videos that were unboxing videos, and the first one was to systematically walk students through how the course worked, and I kept it really logical. And I said, do this first, then do that, then do this, then do that. And this is how this works, and this is how that works. And then the second video I did was much more of an unboxing video, the way that you see with YouTube unboxing videos. And this unboxing video involved looking at the course as if I were a student. And so the way it worked was I said, hey everyone, I know this sounds silly, but I'm going to pretend I'm a student. I'm going to log in with this key into Google Classroom. And you know what? I'm really curious. I want to know where the syllabus is. Oh, it's right here. It's in the Start Here section. Perfect. You know what? I want to know where my assignments are due. Oh, it's right there. And I just pretended I was a student walking through how the course worked. And then I did a survey afterwards. Did they like this sort of systematic introduction to the course, or did they like this weird connective relational messy pretending I'm a student style video? And to my surprise, 80% of my students preferred the second video. They preferred the video where I pretended to be a student rather than systematically walking through it. And again, it's because it really built on this idea of I know what it's like to be you as a student. I'm going to share that empathy. I'm going to begin from that starting place, and then I'm going to walk through, and you can watch me explore how it works. Point number 3 is simplicity. In UX design, there's a huge focus on the idea that design should be simple. So I'm going to show you 2 different websites. The first one is Gmail. This is a lot of white space, a lot of negative space. And it's really intuitive and it's easy to figure out. I have my primary, social, promotions, updates, and forums. So I know it's in different categories. I can star things, I can snooze, I have important items that I have flagged. I can look at my sent, I can look at my drafts, I can look at categories. And it's just really easy to use. It's so seamless that you forget that you had to learn how to use it, right? By contrast, there's a second system. Now, I'm not going to tell you what program this is because I don't want to drag them through the mud, but we use this at the university. And this is a way for us to essentially do evaluations, and it is a mess. The visual cues are not helpful. There's 2 different ones that are folders, so that's meaningless. Adding a link that's not your typical one. Announcements, you got the little push pin, messages, and then a lot of texts in just hyperlink. And then the terminology makes no sense. What is TPA program? I don't even know. What's TPA? What does that mean? DRF program. What does that mean? And then as I look at the top, again, it's just a mess. And it often takes 6 or 7 clicks to get to where I need to go. By contrast, if I go back up to Gmail, everything is within 2 clicks. It's super fast to find things. And if need be, up at the very top in a prominent area, you see the search function. By contrast here, I don't even know where the search function is, right? Search for items, it's way over there, but it's intertitle keywords. Again, really poor UX design. So if we think about a K-12 classroom example, I want to share something that I realized on the UX design side that changed the way that I created the design. And this was a shift from complexity to simplicity. And it really was built on this idea of empathizing with students. So initially, I required students to have the first name, last name, class period, and date. Now, I'm not sure why I required students to put the date on their paper because I never sorted it by date. I never needed to know the date. I'm not sure why I required that, except that, that's what my teachers had done when I was younger. So I guess I would just do the same thing. And finally, I switched and I moved from this complex one to this, giving each student a 3-digit number. And so the way it worked is I had class period 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so each of the 6 class periods, their student number would begin with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And then wherever they were located in the grade book, they got a number. So if they were, last name was, say, Ziffer-Flanderdorf, then they would probably be, 634, right? The 34th student. And if their last name were Anderson, well, they might be, number 2, and their number would be 602. And then when new students came, they just got the additional number. So I didn't sort it alphabetical. I just added the student to the grade book. And a few things happened. The first thing that happened is that students learned their numbers really, really fast. And because they learned their numbers really fast, I'd given them this little printout with just each student number on it and just handed it to them. Every time they lost it was super fast. But the second thing that happened is it made things pretty anonymous. So if there was ever peer feedback or kids needed to pass back papers, it was just a much simpler way of doing that. And then it also made it much easier for me to organize my papers, so I could just put them into numerical order and then use that when I went to put things into the grade book. But on top of that, it saved a lot of classroom time. And that's an example of, again, a UX design perspective. There's nothing pedagogical about this, right? There's nothing wrong with requiring first name and last name and class period. But this was a much simpler system, and it took a lot less time. And I didn't have students writing like their first name and forgetting to write their last name, and then having 7 different students with the same name, and who is this and who is that. And I actually rarely, if ever, had students who didn't put a name on a paper at all. A second idea on the simplicity aspect is to make the systems adjustable. And this is the idea of moving from rigid to adjustable systems. I love this example of World War II pilots. And this comes from a great TED Talk by Todd Rose on the myth of average. So in World War II, a lot of pilots were being shot down. And when the military began to explore this, what they found was that it had to do with the fact that the cockpits didn't fit the pilots perfectly, and that was actually really, really important. The problem is that they had designed the cockpits for the average pilot, but there's no such thing as an average pilot. When they began to explore the data, they found that there were no pilots that actually had the average dimension. You had pilots who were taller and thinner, and then you had some who were taller and thicker, for lack of a better word, ones who were shorter, ones who had a longer torso or longer legs. You get the idea. There is no average pilot. So they tried to figure out what to do, and they talked about, maybe we could have them have custom cockpits that are made for them. Maybe we could have small, medium, large. And then eventually they realized, wait, what if we just made everything in the cockpit adjustable? Like, what if the pilots could adjust it to their own needs? And I love this because it illustrates this idea that there is no such thing as average. So as we think about UX design and the classroom, this is the idea that students should be able to adjust the systems as well. Now, in some cases, this means students could choose the quantity of their work. And I remember students had a really hard time with this at first, because I said, for a blog post, I don't care if it's 200 words or 2,000 words, just get your point across and do it well. And some of them felt like it was unfair, and why am I writing more and getting the same grades? And then suddenly we realized that this is something that happens often in other areas of school, and we don't blink an eye, right? When we do silent reading, kids are reading large amounts of text, 20 pages, and then another student's reading 4 pages. And either way, we say that is great independent reading. You're reading at your level. So this is the idea that students should be able to choose the quantity. The second idea is that students should be able to choose the scaffolding. They should be able to easily find and identify the scaffolding, and that they should be able to choose the strategies, that they're going to use in order to get things done. Here is a small example of designing a lesson plan where student choice is key. Now, this is not project-based. This is not design-based, which are things that I'm a huge fan of. This is an example of an intervention lesson. And on the left, you have learning targets. And so students can choose their learning targets, 1 to 2 learning targets. And then I have the resources. They get to choose which resources they want, which ones they find connect best with them and make the most sense. And then how they're going to wrestle with the information. So they're choosing the end product of what they're going to create. And again, this is the idea of making the design flexible. Number 4, you have this idea of being linear and connective. So if you think about the apps on your phone, or you think about your favorite websites, if you think about, they often have a very linear flow. It's logical, it's sequential, it makes sense. But they're also connective. You can easily move back and forth between pages. You can check things out. You can see this sort of connective, use how you need to sort of approach. And that's a core idea in UX design. It's the idea of keeping things both linear and connective. Now, what does this mean for a classroom? Here's a college example. Having one single document with a linear flow, but then multiple hyperlinks. Now, I want to point out that this document is just one of many documents. So I have it in a table format, and then I also have this exact same document done in a more linear format, and that's because of universal design and making sure that students who are hearing impaired have access and can be able to process the information and see it adequately. So I do want to point out it's not always in a traditional table. This is just one of 2 options. So the very first thing they do is they have the option of, do I want to see this in a table, or do I want to see this in a more linear way? But within this, there are multiple hyperlinks to other documents. And I discovered this a while back. I was in my 2nd year of teaching, and one of my students came to me and said, I don't like how many course resources we have. I was like, what do you mean? They're all in a folder. And he's like, yeah, but could we just have them like in one document? And I realized that it made sense to have, instead of a separate assignment sheet or project sheet for each project, I could just have it all on one single document. And then if they wanted the shorter version, they could just click on the hyperlink and go check it out. And so that's the idea of going both linear and hyperlinked. And so there's this flow that makes sense, but then you can move back and forth within it. And so if they click on the course calendars and they click on those links, they can just see every single assignment. And again, it's all done in this connective and linear way. Number 5 is the idea of soliciting frequent feedback. And one of the ways to do this is through student surveys. So I usually do it 2 to 3 times a semester. I give students a survey on the course design. How organized is it? Is it making sense? How's the communication going? That kind of stuff. And it's really focused on the systems side of things. But the second thing I do is to annotate course documents. And so here students are leaving their questions in the course documents, and then we're answering it as we go. And in an in-person class, I will take about 20 minutes, and they go through the course documents and they annotate it. They ask clarifying questions. And this actually kind of models creative risk-taking. It models, admitting you don't know something. It models curiosity. And then it's also a chance for me to look for the bigger question of what are the pain points? What are the things that students don't understand, and how can I answer those and have better design in the future? And this is actually something taken completely from UX design. People who are UX designers will often have a focus group or a sample group, and within that group they will observe them using a product and they will look for the pain points. They will sometimes have them fill out surveys. They will sometimes have them ask questions, and all of that they use as they iterate and improve. And through more and more iterations, their design becomes better and better and better. And I think the same thing can happen in a classroom, whether it's a physical classroom, a hybrid class, or an online course that you're teaching. Number 6 is a key idea in UX design, which is to be consistent. This involves using consistent language. For example, Unit 2 discussion should always be called Unit 2 discussion. Don't call it Unit 2 forum or Unit 2 conversation. And that was the big aha moment that I had when I looked at that first course I did, is I would say something like paper and essay interchangeably, and students were confused. We used the term professional educator blog and teacher blog, and they said, are these two different blogs I'm supposed to do? And I realized I need to improve this. I need to fix this. The second thing is to have consistent format. And I'll give an example. When we do assignment sheets and students look at what they're supposed to do, every single time there's overview, grouping, directions, so on and so forth, and they know exactly what they're supposed to do. And so as they go through this, they know that there's, the overview, the grouping, the directions, and if they go down, there's going to be more directions. It's going to be done in a Q&A format. There's going to be bulleted points. I'm going to answer their questions in an FAQ. And then as they scroll down and they look through all of this, they should be able to find a place where they know the format. What format does my work need to be in? My submission process, how do I submit my work? The grading, and often there will be a rubric attached to the grading. And then the due date at the very bottom. Now, I've since then added a lot of different times when they do this. They'll also get a icons for each of those, grouping, directions. Those have little icons connected to them. But you get the idea. Every single assignment has this exact same framework. It's a template that I've developed that I use every single time. If you think about the slideshows that you do, like the PowerPoints that you put up when you're teaching, I use the exact same slideshows every single time, and it's a template. There's going to be individual, partner, whatever. The formatting's on the top left-hand corner. The time deadline's on the top right-hand corner. The directions are in the middle. And again, every single time, they know exactly what to expect. And it's invisible, but it's intuitive and it's easy for them to use. Number 7, you want to incorporate multimedia. And this could be audio, video, it can be conferencing, all kinds of different media that you're choosing to use. And the idea is that you also have these visual spatial cues. And you saw that when you looked at the airport example of having these big visual spatial cues. If we go back to what I had just shown you, you're going to see that you have individual on the top left-hand corner. And that visual is the same visual I use when I have class procedures and I want to show what individual work looks like. I have a separate icon that I've created for pairs and for small group and for whole class. The time deadline is done in a spatial way, right? So I created one that separate icons for every 5 minutes, and I just copy and paste those icons onto the top right hand corner so they know exactly how much time they have to do assignments. In the middle, they will always have an icon that represents blog post, journal entry, whatever. And just by looking at that, they don't even have to read the word blog post. They know, get on my blog, that's where I'm going to do that. And then the directions at the bottom. And those are in clear, easy to read format. The final one is to be intentional about copy text. I would highly recommend learning a thing or two about copywriting and the value in writing copy in a way that is easy to understand as a teacher. One of the lessons I learned was to not over communicate. Often in the midst of projects, I would do these really long directions, and I would take 20 minutes to give directions on a project. And what was happening is students were taking notes, they were being diligent, and then they would check out and they would get lost, they would get confused. And what I was doing was I was actually over communicating. So I started saying, I'm going to put directions up on the board and I'm not going to even say it out loud, or I'm going to say it out loud really quickly, and then I'm going to answer their questions as we go. Because one of the key lessons there is to consider the importance of cognitive load and to remember that people can't process too much information. They need a chance to have a pair share. They need a chance to write something down. They need a chance to play around with something before they move on to something else. So this is the idea of limiting the cognitive load and making it as easy to understand as possible. The bottom line is, as the architect in your classroom, you can design systems that are easier to use and more empathy driven so that students will know what to do. And when this happens, that design will be invisible and it will work in a much more seamless, easy to use kind of way. The bottom line is that it will never. So final thought is this. UX design is a great framework for thinking about the systems and structures in the classroom. When you implement elements of UX design, things will work in a way that's much more seamless and intuitive, and really you begin to build more empathy toward your students and what they're experiencing. But that being said, it is just one small thing. The bottom line, the most important thing is how you design your instruction and what kind of relationship you build with your students. However, if the systems are chaotic and messy, it's going to hurt the instruction and it's going to get in the way of the relationships. The best design is going to be invisible. And when you take the time to be intentional about UX design, your students will benefit in the long run.